welcome to Get Even, the podcast where Even co-founders myself, Ellen Sullivan, and Dr. Nora Kozlowski sit down with extraordinary women who've been there and done that in the world of business. Get Even is your backstage pass to their lived experiences, raw insights, personal stories, and the realities of their success. So whether you're looking for inspiration, practical advice and skills, or a peek behind the curtain of what it really takes to thrive, this is the podcast for women who are ready to go further. It's time to get even. Today, we're joined by Sarah Kaur, who's the Principal of Human-Centered AI, Data Governance and Cyber at Portable. She is also the winner of the Women in AI Asia Pacific Awards in Creative Industries. Sarah is a strategic designer and a HCD researcher. Her passion is about supporting the creative work of teams across disciplines to collaborate and come up with smart ways to create impacts using participatory design. She was a design thinking practitioner at CSIRO's Data 61, where she focused on research into responsible AI and embedding human insight into machine learning and AI research and product development. This is a great conversation because Sarah really understands the incredible potential for AI to support positive outcomes in policy and consumer experiences, but she also deeply understands the lack of awareness about the appropriate ethical and technical governance in the AI space. It's a fantastic conversation full of practical insights, real stories from Sarah's personal and professional life. Can't wait for you to have a listen. Let's meet Sarah. Hi, Sarah. A warm welcome to
Hello, how you doing?
Good. Thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to see lots of different questions and understand about your hard-earned expertise and experience. So let's jump right into it. And I want to start with your journey from moving from the arts into the world of Gen AI and data and really understand what your career story is. So how do you make sense of that rich background and what's the beauty you see in combining those different skill sets?
Thank you. Well, I've definitely taken quite a loopy journey, I suppose, into the world of designing and thinking about Gen AI or AI more generally. And I think the through story that maybe I'll try and emphasize as I tell you the story is that I think it's incredibly creative and incredibly critical. So those two, I guess, kind of values are important to me, and expressing them in different ways, I suppose, is probably the through line. But I guess when I started thinking about my career, I really wanted to do so. I did a Bachelor of Fine Arts. I worked in dance organizations. I was a festival, a multi-arts platform festival producer and curator, a dance filmmaker. And that was probably how I spent the most of my time, though of course it was supplemented with part-time work in hospitality, a little bit of work in public service, some time spent in a florist. You kind of, as an artist, just find different ways to make things work. But I found my niche or my passion was actually creating live experiences with a multimedia aspect to them. And I became, I guess, quite good at getting residencies and grants to travel and present work in different places and collaborate with different people, which I really loved. And then I don't know what, or if you've had people express an early career burnout that makes them pivot, but I probably got to about, I don't know, late 20s and thought, how long can I do this? It's quite hard to, always be applying for your next grant. It's always hard to be traveling. Couldn't hold down relationships with people or even a city or a home, and started to look for perhaps what were the transferable skills that I needed to enter the proper workforce. I had the fortune of chatting to a friend who was working in a digital agency at the time. We're probably talking about 15 years or more ago. So I was living in Melbourne. There were a few kind of digital agencies popping up, and we were just starting as an industry to transition from hand-built websites into more platform-based websites. And so I started really right at the bottom. I had a hilarious interview with my first boss, and we were running through, can you plan a project? How do you report on your budget? How do you talk to all the people involved? How do you manage your team? And I was able to answer all of them pretty convincingly from the arts kind of context. And then he said, he looked at me and he's like, so how does the internet work? And I'm like, well, it's a democratic place where people can all come together and share their ideas. And oh my God, like message boards, forums, websites, can buy anything these days. And he's like, but how does it work? And I'm like, let me get back to you. And I had this real, it's not even imposter syndrome. I wasn't trying to like even pretend, but I went back after the interview, did a bunch of research, sent him an email. I was like, look, I think this is kind of how technically the infrastructure is working behind the scenes. And then I sent him a link to the IT crowd where there's the episode where they have the button that turns the internet on and off. And I was like, it just works like this. So he must have appreciated the humor. I ended up getting a job, staying there for like 4 or 5 years and kind of earning my stripes in digital production. I went through a few years. Maybe this is relevant when we're thinking about women and careers, but I had my first and only child while I was working there. The workforce at the time was quite young, so I was the first person to like have a child. I remember sitting in a car park and being on the phone to a client, but it was technically like my day off, and I was also breastfeeding, and I was like just awkwardly trying to multitask and do everything. And I had this like moment and I decided, and I was like, I can't do this, or if I'm going to do this, it's got to be about something I really care about. I can't just be making websites and doing advertising and marketing. Like, how do I transform the things I love to do? How do I still become a creative person in this new field? And so I started to hunt around for purpose-driven organizations. I found Portable, which is probably like a career-defining, I suppose, place and organization for me in my little life cycle. They really cared about mental health, access to justice, aging, death, and I led operations, but within that, the research and development stream. And where I kind of found my previous experience in not only kind of creating, but behind that, the meaning and the context of bringing people together to create something. I think that's the kind of, at the abstract level, I started to go, okay, like when we are faced with thinking about how can we design better ways to handle how we move through the experience of someone dying or ourselves dying, the best way to tackle that isn't just from a digital experience standpoint, it's from a human standpoint. It's about meaning making together, communication, collaboration with end users or the people and the systems around us. And that was kind of my love, I suppose, around human-centered design and coming out in my new kind of professional journey. And to loop it back all the way into AI, we started to work with AI across a number of areas. But there was one product in particular where we were building AI for the family court. The use case was amicable couples that needed to separate. Could we relieve the cost of that and the pressure on the courts by doing a DIY kind of experience? Along the way, I learned so much around, we hired data scientists and I was leading that team. I realized that I didn't have a lot of technical expertise, but the design critical lens could help us arrive at decisions that would influence, I guess, the type of data science techniques that were appropriate, the kinds of data that we selected that were appropriate for the use case. And it opened my eyes as well into the ethics and the responsibility that anyone working with AI or machine learning has when they are developing systems. So during COVID, for some reason, I had FOMO. I already had a full-time job, had a 5-year-old, but I was like, it is not enough. Everyone's like going back to school online. So I thought, here's my opportunity. I went and got a master's in data analytics. And it was so hard. And I hadn't done math since like year 12, but I was like, you got to learn. You can't just abstract anymore. Like you if you want to play in this field, you got to skill up technically. And so I did that. Along the way, I kept looking out for units or subjects or research or literature that would say human-centered design and data science or AI overlap, because in my mind I was like, they definitely do. There's got to be something, but I wasn't finding anything. So I started to look around for, in Australia, might be taking a similar approach that I can learn from. And I started noticing CSIRO's Data 61, the team publishing a lot of responsible AI. I realized the design team within the organization, and then I just cold reached out to the design team lead.
Wow. I love there's so much in that journey, Sarah. So much. Like, it's such a purpose-driven journey. Like, you're continually seeking purpose. What a learning mindset you have. Like, just to continually just go, what do I want? I'm going to go for it.
It's true. And I think that's probably a helpful mindset, because there's always things that are changing around us. And so, in various ways, we all develop adaptation strategies almost. And mine is just, if I can keep being curious and keep being like, I'm not afraid I can learn the thing. And that's something that's helped me, I think, make a few transitions.
Amazing. So can you tell us a bit more about this role you have at Data 61 and what that looks like?
Yeah, so I mean, really what it looks like is very much me trying to learn a lot, because I work with such smart people, researchers and scientists who all are domain knowledge experts in a very deep kind of way. My job as a design thinking practitioner, I sit within a larger design and engineering team. And our job is to try and partner with the scientists and the researchers and say, your work is amazing. You're tackling huge problems, very complex problems, but they need to be eventually deployed into the real world. And how much can we find out about the real world context and help you bring that science and technology into, I guess, a way that sees the impact being delivered. And I guess to bring it to life, I could give you a couple of examples.
That would be great.
Yeah. So one of the teams that is really strong here is a responsible AI team. They've been working together and publishing, so much literature about what it means to be responsible when you're looking at AI, both from a technical and a governance perspective. And there was a partnership between Alfinity Investment Management, so one of our, Australia's, I would say, very thoughtful investment firms. And they were looking at the question of, AI is starting to really play out. It's becoming something that CEOs and boards and shareholders increasingly are starting to want to understand. And the question is, how is it going to affect or influence my investment portfolio? And so we thought, you know what? Why don't we take all of this research that we've done into what makes AI responsible and essentially a good investment and try and fit it into something that investors already understand, so ESG, build a framework around ESG investment that incorporates both the good and the bad of AI, that actually is built just for investment analysts specifically to support those decisions. And so it's kind of taking a broad range of research with a lot of depth and customizing it for a specific use case and trying to use co-design along the way to make sure that it's meeting the needs of how it should.
I can see how you're thinking about your end user there, which is investors who are keen, but they probably might have moved away from the idea if you hadn't kind of thought about something, or what's their needs, what problems are we trying to solve. When this would have been, 18 months ago, and now the world of Gen AI is in a completely different space.
It is.
But
yeah, it definitely is. It's moving so fast. And actually, even thinking about the design decision of a framework for analysis for investors, to what degree do we try and zoom into specific types of AI technologies, specific ways it might be used across different industries and sectors, because that guidance is always going to need to be refreshed almost at a rate that is too hard for us to keep up with. But we sought to kind of not just go back to first principles, but try and say, these are indicators that you can look for in the management construct of your company. That probably means that they're thinking about it in a safe way. Do they have training and governance at the board level so the board knows what decisions they're making? Do they have someone who's identified in a role or an ethical kind of position? Do their legal teams give them regular briefings about the intersection between developments in AI regulations and law that affects their industry? So we were trying to kind of go, what's not going to be evergreen, but what are some markers that you can hang on to as the technology changes that still implies a good decision-making and good thoughts processes?
Yeah, there's a bit of a masterclass in that in itself, isn't it? Kind of what does good decision-making look like? So whilst you've built a framework for AI and investment, really it's kind of what does good decision-making look like for organizations? Because we know that that's something they struggle with constantly.
Across all domains, yeah.
Can we go a little bit deeper on kind of that expert-driven environment that you're working in? You're working with some of the best researchers, academics in the world. And so how do you define your value within that environment?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because I think the value of design thinking can influence almost across the whole breadth, not only of the organization and the types of research and disciplines it has. So, for example, there's health and biosecurity, there's food and agriculture, and you can think about design thinking being deployed in each of those contexts to work with industry partners to do that end user research, as well as the design and development of any technology or products coming out of it. But you can also think about design being employed on an organizational level. So thinking about how does design thinking support innovation, which is really at the core of what CSIRO does as part of its mission. And you can even start to think about how does design thinking and specifically design research influence the possible research directions and content of what we're trying to do. So, for example, we might be looking at a particular use of AI as part of the design research activities. The value that bring is we're looking not just at the technology, but how it fits into a human kind of workforce or context or process. And along the way, we might be identifying a lot of people have questions or concerns about the use of AI in this particular way, or one very common barrier. It's not science or rocket science or really technology news, but with Gen AI, how can we ever trust the outputs of it? And so we are able to understand the nuances of the challenges of science or research concepts and possibly even say, this is actually one of the problems we have to solve as well. So it opens up new fields of research for people as well.
I mean, like considering that they're an innovation-led organization, you can see how all these different specialists are required to be able to continually stay at the cutting edge. One of our even experts is at IBM.
Cool.
And she's talking about how for her, she needs, different capabilities in her squad to be able to help organizations with their complex challenges. So you might have a data scientist, you might have a designer, you might have someone who's on quality control, but you need those mix of capabilities to be really kind of leading in innovation. And so I can hear that coming out there, and how like you can see how your role has very equal value, especially when you're thinking about the end user.
Definitely. Almost that story of, how design is done at IBM and the recognition of the value of different disciplines and backgrounds. I love that we're kind of talking really about diversity as well, and diversity making a team wonderful and, valuing, although we bring in different things, if we're able to respect the value that each of us actually is bringing, that kind of makes the very fertile ground for innovation, but also, just the basics like teamwork, a great place to turn up and do your work.
Always something new to learn from others. So we keep talking about Gen AI, and I'd love to understand with your background, like how do you keep up with this evolving kind of field, and just practically, what are some of the resources that you find really valuable?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm actually honestly keeping up with it. I think my new way of describing it is I'm just like letting news wash over me. Because it's coming at us so very fast.
Yeah.
I find myself most active on LinkedIn, and probably my LinkedIn feed is how I get 60% of my information. I try to tune in as well to a couple of podcasts. There's a really great one called the AI Daily Brief. And it's interesting because it does tackle deep dives on the technology, but it also zooms out and looks at the economic or competitive landscape of, the big Gen AI players, talks about benchmarking of different models, but they do it in a very conversational way. So I find that one a really good all-rounder. Where there's a particular interest of mine, whether that's driven by the research agenda of projects I'm working on, so it might be diversity and bias in AI, I tend to kind of try and keep an eye on the literature coming out and looking at science and journal articles. And then I think the other way, which is probably 10 to 20%, and the bit that I find most interesting, is chatting to people. So talking to my friends that I've had since high school, talking to people and colleagues that I work with, and kind of trying to go, not just what is like the cutting edge technology of Gen AI, but how do just everyday people feel about it? I think it's really, that's the place that we need to develop trust and good solutions. And so I'm always looking for clues, I suppose, from different parts of the world that I've got access to.
I think it's a great point because you get very immersed in what the news cycle is saying, and then it's really a great way to cut through is actually what do different people in different industries, how are they considering Gen AI? And when I think about people I've chatted to in government, some of them are not allowed to use Gen AI yet for their job. And then I think about chatting to people in retail, and whilst they might be a large organization, they're not actually using it to predict the kind of buying trends that they might have in the future. And so you kind of go, oh, that's interesting. From what I'm reading in the media, everything's already changed. But actually, when you get down to the human level, it's still in quite a long transition.
It is. And I think there's going to be various like inflection points in the long transition. But I was reflecting the other day that I'm 40, and I was like, am I kind of in the last generation who can reliably know human knowledge? because just Gen AI is flooding all kinds of things, right? We don't know the new estimates of how much of the internet that we read has got a Gen AI kind of thumbprint somewhere in its pipeline or its background. And I was just thinking, like, I feel like we're on the cusp of human to forever augmented ways of knowing the world. I haven't really thought too far about that or its implications, but I was like, oh, I wonder what this means.
With all these different stakeholder groups that you're working with, and you're working with them day to day, you might be meeting them for the first time. Some of them might be colleagues, some of them might be new partners. And you're thinking about these very complex problems. How do you lead a group like that to kind of stay focused, to kind of connect in the right ways? What are some of the strategies that you use to kind of get the best results?
Yeah, I think if I kind of zoom out a little bit, I think design skills such as facilitation, the ability to, this sounds a bit woo-woo, but like the ability to host yourself and be aware of yourself in relation to multiple others and understand what's sensitive to room dynamics, and almost prepare and be intentional about how you design spaces, communications, the raw sequence of how you invite participation. All of those almost like micro skills or experiences that you pick up are wonderfully enabling of us to be leaders, whether that's, in a formal management position, a leader who's asked to take the space for a particular time on a particular project. So I think that we could almost break it down to say, first of all, know your audience, know who's coming if you can. As you start to build relationships, I think you start to get, not only more trust between you and the other individual stakeholder, but you also are able to build more and more trust in the room. There's an important step, I think, where we might need to come forward and say, I'm not the project leader. In fact, I am the designer, and we've got a science research leader, or we've got, it might be, we've got the head of a department visiting. However, just for the next 2 hours, let me lead you through this experience and the agenda and the activities, because I want you to fully participate. I want you to give us your thoughts as in your position of influence, and I will just be quite open, but it's equally important to hear the perspectives of every other person in the room. So let me do that hard work for you. I will facilitate the next 2 hours of dialogue or whatever it might be. So yeah, there's a few kind of strategies that are quite practical, I think.
Yeah, I think people can definitely feel going into a room of people and having to lead that group through something can be quite a daunting task, especially if they're much more senior than you or older than you, or you could be the only woman going into a room full of men. And this kind of approach can actually support you in a lot of ways. It can support you in kind of making you feel more confident, making you feel more prepared, and thinking about your audience is a way to think about how to craft your communications. So I think there's some really kind of practical tools in that. And so as a woman in these scenarios as well, first of all, I guess the question is, do you feel like there's a difference between how a woman might be portrayed in these scenarios compared to a man? And then, what do you use to kind of ensure that you have authority in the room?
Yeah, it's a huge question. I feel like the answer is yes, but more and more it's hard for me to identify glaringly obvious examples of how it comes out. I think this is a very good thing. As an example, there will be conferences on AI, and you immediately pick up on whether the conference organizers have done the work to ensure there's, not only a gender balance, but a rich diversity of age, gender, kind of any other attribute, as well as viewpoint and perspective. I went to a conference, and I hate to say it, but it was really recent. It was last year. And it started at, 7:30 with the breakfast and blah, blah. And we had about like 6 sessions with multiple speakers. And it was lunchtime, and I hadn't seen a single female on the stage. And
yeah, wow.
Yeah, I was shocked. And I kind of realized, I was like, I'm so offended. Like, how can it be 2020, whatever, 3, and this is how it is? And I actually talked to the organizer of the conference, and I was just like, hey, when are we going to see a woman on stage? And he said to me, well, you know how it is. This is a high quality conference. We need people who really know what they're talking about. A lot of people are just jumping on the bandwagon on AI. And, I did try. I just haven't been able to find the right people, but let's talk later. Maybe you can introduce me to some. And I was like, oh, I can introduce you to some absolute stunning experts who happen to be women. They're not that hard to find. And they've been doing this solidly for the last 25 years and talking very openly about it. Who are you listening and talking to that they haven't even come up on your radar? So there's moments that actually inspire me to be a bit bolder as a woman in asking for that. And I try not to do it in a confrontational way all the time, because generally I feel a lot of people will have really wonderful intentions somehow. And sometimes it's an intention gap with your network or your knowledge or your bias or something. So I'm always like, if I can help you understand maybe where that gap is and take that next step to connect you to amazing people who happen to be women and may not have had the opportunities that you've had to be in your circle, then I'm going to lean into that. So, yeah.
I love that you asked the question. I did not expect that would be the response.
Neither. It was almost like, what do you say this to
quite
me?
a shocking response. Yeah. I mean, this is part of the reason why we're setting up Even, is that we know there are fantastic, awesome women out there in so many different fields. We still constantly see men in the position of leadership, men in the position of knowledge, men in the position of insight. And as a woman coming up in your career, it's very hard for you to work out what could it look like for me? What could it be for me? Who could I be? That's a very smart man, but I don't know if it really applies to my context.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, there's very amazing men out there, but a strong role model for women who maybe haven't seen lots of strong role models that are women. That's what we're trying to do with Even, and just create kind of unlimited role models.
I love that. Role models really should be as diverse as the people who want to see a model for themselves, or see themselves being able to be somebody else's, I guess, role model. I love that mission. I love the platform that you're making for people who are like on a career journey. And maybe I'll share a story that's like an anecdotal counterpoint to the horrible trend.
Please. Please.
Okay, so this is going back to Portable, and the founders, Simon and Andrew, both male, but like I would call them both some of the most passionate feminists that I know.
Amazing.
Would
love to talk to them.
They are so wonderful. And they would encourage, I guess, different staff members to actually go and become thought leaders in different fields. I don't know why, I was pretty into Agile at the time, and I looked at the Agile manifesto and the way it was put together, which was like 19 men on a ski trip, literally, who wrote it 25 years ago. And I presented a feminist revisionist approach to the Agile manifesto. And it was fun. It was really fun. It was like hashtag Vagile, which was one of the developers came up with that. But during the talk, I'd actually would bring up the entire production team, who were all women from different backgrounds, different places. Half of us were immigrants. It was awesome. So we were all like, we are visibly present, as this is your new role kind of for Agile facilitation. And one of the questions from the audience was, I love this. You're obviously talking, very much from a feminist point of view, but like, where are the men? And I was like, this is a brilliant question. And I said, well, the men are here, like we're in the office. There's our development team, that they're all the men. But I was like, the amazing thing is that our leaders, who are men, cleared the stage so we could be up here and talk about this. And so they are here with us. You just don't see them. So I think there's beautiful stories, both in what we see and don't hear about on both sides of the coins. I think those are some good stories worth sharing.
It's amazing how heartwarming those stories are. They really can make such a leap for us to know that whilst we can all remember the bad moments, there are really special people out there who are really trying to kind of move the dial. How do you see, if you can see, how do you see your role evolving over the next few years, and the role you play as kind of technology just kind of exponentially kind of changes?
Honestly, I do not know. I hope to be part of a growing number of people and professionals who are thinking of value alignment in AI as we deploy it more and more. By which I mean, how much can we confidently trust that the AI systems we are using are aligned with the values that we consider important? That comes with a caveat insofar that we agree and align ourselves on the values that are important. And so some of the things I hope are in my future could be encouraging other designers to step into this space and to see themselves as creative and able to help us progress using not just design, but the creative, I guess, processes, sensitivities, intuitions that we have as designers, as artists, as creative people. How can we actually make our voices come in from the margins so that we're having a counterpoint to the technological progress mindset? One of the things that I'm trying to do to that end is speak to people about having not only empathy with other people and not only empathy with environment and nature, but with data. So as we kind of continue on this trajectory, more and more of us are being represented as like data in a database somewhere. And how representative that is of who we are, I'm not sure. But I do know that these databases, the data that is extracted or inferred about us, is actually informing not just how products are made, not just the advertising that is kind of pushed out, but also how policy decisions are made, how funding and resource allocations are given out. So they have some pretty real consequences. And one way is to kind of think about it and say, hey, I'm encountering data in my job. I'm being asked to analyze it or do something with it. What if I stopped and if I was like having an interview with a human, I would say, hello, do you consent to being here? Did you come here alone? Are there other parts to you that would help me understand your context a bit better? Does your owner, does your human know that you're here talking to me? What happens when we actually try to extend our basic respect for humans into the data that's supposed to be representative of us? So that's kind of one speculative, I guess, prompt that I'd like to give people. And then the other is, gosh, I don't know. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but definitely, I don't know, for me, I would fall back again on being curious and learning. And I think that almost every other person has probably got different management strategies, but all I can say is probably the pace of change is going to get faster. So we have to look after ourselves in that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, is this how it sounds like what you're talking about is how you stay authentic to a career that's valuable for you and the life you lead and the people, people that surround you? So you're talking about living in a very kind of human way, but can you expand a bit more about how you make decisions around your career and your life and future you?
Yes, I think right at the start you picked up that I try to have a purpose-led future orientation. I think when I think about my career, I tend to go, where is not just the type of problem or type of industry, but where is the type of team environment that I can make a difference? Mm-hmm. So I've been a management or in senior leadership positions. Right now, I'm not. And there's different kinds of abilities to influence and support teams in different ways that I find amazing. Someone had asked me, hey, think about a project and what are you most proud of? And is that because of scale or impact? What is that? And I kind of said, there's projects where I know I've done a great job and it's resulted in something that's being used by lots of people and they love it. And that's one thing of scale. But actually, when I think about what does it mean to have helped a team or a company grow to a certain size that there's 60 or 70 humans that I've had the pleasure to work with in a certain way. And the scale is actually in the type of human, the type of thinking, the processes, and the collaboration opportunities. That scales more than I could ever think. And so I think that's increasingly on my mind as I think about a career is not just the type of company, not just the type of application or industry, but increasingly it's where can I contribute to a team that will make a wonderful difference in the world.
You can see that's an approach where you're just going to keep being delighted, I think. You can see how you're going into teams, you're thinking about what you can learn from them, and I'm thinking about how you can work together to get those results. Whilst we all have challenges of different personalities and different people, at the same time, you can see how that is a really interesting way to define success for you, because it's not about a goal. It's almost like about a standard. It's a standard that you want to go and create an impact with a group of people. It's really interesting to understand. So.
Yeah, it's good. And I haven't, it hasn't been, I definitely would say it's a later realization. And I've had the pleasure of working with amazing people who've helped me kind of realize that, right? So, and one of them was a people and culture leader. And I think she was giving me tips on how to approach getting difficult feedback. Because I think being oriented towards being a collaborator or a servant leader, sometimes the shadow side is conflict is hard. I just really want to get along well with everyone and let's all go in the same direction. And so sometimes getting feedback that it's that's not what it looks like at all from the outside. People do not understand what you're doing. You are chaotic and people just are like, okay, just let you be in your whirlwind. And that's confronting to hear. But she was also like, look, if you want to be effective, take the feedback as you will, but it's information. It's information about how you are being perceived and maybe what your next kind of growth areas are if you really want to do this. And yeah, it's helped me really shift my perspective on it.
That's a great hack it's feedback is just information. It's what you do with it that really is what means something. We also like to ask this question of all our experts, which is, why do you think it's important that women have access to something like Even? What do you think it can do for them, their career, their life?
Well, I think we've touched, I think, on lots of themes already, right? So part of it is role modeling. Part of it is, I think, just a mission where, yeah, why aren't things even? Why are they not? Let's make it. And I think there's also a real opportunity for us to situate ourselves in a safer space with other communities of people to discuss things together quite openly. And I think an ambition perhaps is to start to understand other intersectional kind of voices, whether they're queer or different migrant or religious kind of perspectives, because I think under the banner of making things even between the genders, there's just so much variety. So I think it's also an opportunity just to learn again from others as well.
I love it. We didn't call it she power, we called it Even, and that's what really needs to be happening out there, so that we can be more human-centered as we move forward as a society. Sarah, thank you so much for kind of sharing so openly today and sharing what's worked for you, what challenges you've come across. We really appreciate that you've shared your journey with the Even community. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for listening today. I'm Ellen Sullivan, co-founder of Even. Find out more about Even at even-careers.com and tune in next week to hear from another amazing woman in business.